Ever get that feeling where you really want to dig deep on a topic, like you want to understand something quickly, but you also want to be thorough and kind of get right to the heart of it?
Oh, absolutely. I think
Yeah.
we've all been there, especially with how much information is out there these days.
All right, exactly. So that's exactly what we're aiming for today. We're doing a deep dive into something that might sound a little unexpected, but it's actually pretty crucial to how we think about scientific research in general.
Yeah.
It all stems from an analysis of a huge collection of scientific knowledge.
Hmm.
And this analysis raises a pretty wild question.
A big one, yeah.
What if a huge amount of scientific research, like a really significant portion of it, was essentially invisible?
Invisible. Wow, okay. That's definitely attention grabbing. I'm intrigued.
Yeah, it's a pretty provocative idea, right? That's what we're going to unpack today.
Sounds like a fascinating deep dive.
It really is. And to get into this, we're looking at an analysis done by Prophy. Prophy.
Yeah, I know Prophy. They have that enormous database of scientific papers.
Precisely. 172 million papers, to be exact.
Wow, that's a lot of papers.
Right. It's massive. So their CEO, Oleg Rachesky, he spearheaded this analysis, and it reveals something about the current state of scientific output that, honestly, is kind of mind-blowing.
Mind-blowing how? Lay it on me.
Okay, so here's the core finding, the thing that really jumped out at us. Over 50% of the scientific papers in Prophy's database, and remember, this is a truly massive database, have zero citations.
Wait, over half. Really?
Over half. Like more than half of these papers, 90 million papers,
Yeah.
have never been cited by other researchers. Zero. Nada. Zilch.
90 million papers. That's an incredible number. I mean, just thinking about the amount of work, the time, the resources that went into all that research, and it's just sitting there uncited.
It really makes you wonder about the potential implications, right?
Yeah.
What does it mean for the progress of science if so much research is effectively invisible to other scientists?
Yeah, that's a really important question. And I bet some people listening are thinking, well, hold on. How do we know these papers are even legitimate? Maybe they're just low quality research or something.
I think that's a totally fair question. And you know what? Prophy actually addressed that head on. They knew people would be skeptical, so they built in some pretty rigorous checks to their process.
Okay, good. So what did they do?
So they have this really detailed verification process where they analyze each scientist's citation network, who is citing whom and all that.
Right.
And then they cross-reference that data
Yeah.
with like all the major bibliographic databases. They do this multiple times too to make sure it's accurate. They didn't just take this lightly.
Okay, so it sounds like they went to a lot of effort to make sure their data is solid.
They really did. And here's another thing that makes this whole thing even more compelling. Their findings aren't unique to Prophy's database.
Oh, really?
Yeah, they took their data and cross-verified it with another huge database, OpenAlex. And guess what? The percentage of uncited articles was even higher in OpenAlex.
Higher. Wow. What was it there?
56.7%, so even more uncited papers.
So we have two massive databases, both independently showing that a huge chunk of scientific research is going uncited.
I know, right? It's pretty mind-blowing.
It is.
And to be even more specific, Prophy didn't just lump all scientific output together. They broke their analysis down into different categories.
Like what? What kind of categories?
So they looked at peer-reviewed articles, which, let's be honest, most of us consider the gold standard of scientific publishing. But they also looked at preprints, supplementary materials, and even things like front matter.
Oh, interesting. So they were really trying to see how citations varied across different types of publications.
Exactly. And, it's not too surprising that things like supplementary materials or front matter might not get cited that often.
Right. Those things are more like supporting information or context, not the main research findings.
Precisely. But here's the real kicker. Even when they focus solely on the peer-reviewed articles, the ones that have gone through the rigorous process of peer review, a substantial portion of them were still uncited.
How substantial are we talking?
Prophy found that 49.2% of peer-reviewed articles had zero citations. And OpenAlex's figure, again, was even higher.
So nearly half, even after all that work to get peer-reviewed and published,
It's a lot, right? It means a massive amount of potentially important research is effectively invisible. Like, it's out there, but no one's engaging with it.
Wow. So this isn't just a small issue, is it? This seems like a pretty widespread phenomenon.
It does, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And it makes you wonder if this has always been the case or if it's gotten worse over time. Prophy actually dug into some historical data, and they found a 2018 article in Science that looked at citation rates.
Oh, cool. So what did that show?
Well, back then, it looks like there was already a significant amount of research going uncited. The Science article reported a roughly 18% 10-year uncited rate across all disciplines.
18%, huh? That's not insignificant.
Definitely not. But here's the thing. That figure excluded self-citations. So it was already a pretty substantial number even back then.
Okay, so we've gone from about 18% in 2018 to over 50% now. That's a huge jump.
It is a huge jump. And it seems kind of counterintuitive, right? You'd think that with all the advancements in technology, the sophisticated search engines we have now, the tools designed to help researchers find relevant work. You'd think the problem of uncited research would be getting better, not worse.
Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, we have more information available than ever before, but it seems like we're not getting any better at actually connecting the dots between different pieces of research.
Exactly. So this begs the question, what does this phenomenon, what Prophy calls scientific silence, actually mean in the real world? We're not just talking about numbers on a spreadsheet, right?
Absolutely not. These numbers represent real people, real effort, real resources. Think about it. Researchers spend years, sometimes decades, working on a specific problem. They spend countless hours in the lab, meticulously writing up their findings, going through the often grueling process of peer review.
Right. It's a huge investment of time and energy.
It is. And within those 90 million uncited papers, there could be groundbreaking discoveries, potential solutions to some of the world's most pressing problems, fundamental insights that could spark entirely new fields of research.
It's kind of a sobering thought, isn't it?
Like,
Like, imagine dedicating your career to solving a particular problem, making a genuine breakthrough, and then your work just sits there, unread and unacknowledged.
it's almost tragic, really, and it raises some pretty unsettling questions about how we value and utilize scientific knowledge.
Yeah, it really does. And Prophy highlights some really interesting possibilities here. Like, what if there are crucial negative results buried in this mountain of uncited research? Studies that show what doesn't work.
Which are incredibly important, by the way. Knowing what dead ends to avoid can save researchers a ton of time and resources.
Absolutely. But if those negative results aren't visible, other researchers might end up repeating the same mistakes, wasting time and effort that could be spent on more promising avenues.
Right. And Prophy also points out that there could be ahead of their time papers in there too. Those studies that are maybe a little too innovative or unconventional for their time, but that might actually contain the seeds of future breakthroughs.
Like those early papers that later win Nobel Prizes.
Exactly. But if those papers are lost in the sea of uncited research, who knows how long it might take for their true value to be recognized.
It makes you wonder how many potential breakthroughs we might be missing out on.
It really does, and it's not just about missed discoveries. This phenomenon has wider implications for the scientific community as a whole.
Oh, absolutely. In fact, Prophy argues that this scientific silence can actually hinder the progress of science in a number of ways.
Okay, I'm listening.
For one thing, if a large portion of research is invisible, it can lead to misallocation of research funding.
Right, because funding bodies might be unaware of existing research in a particular area, so they might end up funding projects that are essentially duplicating work that's already been done.
Precisely. It's inefficient and wasteful.
And it's not just funding. This lack of visibility can also lead to duplication of research efforts across different institutions and research groups.
Oh, for sure. Imagine multiple teams working on the same problem, completely unaware of each other's work, because none of their research has been cited.
It's like reinventing the wheel over and over again.
And that's not good for anyone. It slows down progress and wastes valuable resources.
And it also raises concerns about equity and accessibility within the scientific community. Prophy specifically points out that this issue can be particularly challenging for early career researchers.
Oh, definitely. It's already tough for young researchers to get their work noticed, and this just adds another layer of difficulty.
Right. If you're starting out in a field where a lot of the relevant research is effectively invisible, it's going to be that much harder to make your mark and get your work recognized.
Absolutely. And it can be incredibly discouraging for those just starting out.
It can. And it can also make it harder for the scientific community as a whole to effectively build upon existing knowledge and identify the most promising areas for future research.
So where does Prophy fit into all of this? I mean, they were the ones who brought this whole issue to light with their analysis. What's their take on what this means for scientific publishing?
Well, Prophy sees these findings as a major turning point, what they call a watershed moment for the world of scientific publishing. They believe that their continuously growing database, which now has over 172 million papers, combined with their increasingly sophisticated analytical tools, allows them to spot these large-scale patterns that might have gone unnoticed using more traditional methods of analysis.
So they're essentially saying that we now have the ability to see things about the state of scientific knowledge that we couldn't see before.
Exactly. And what they're seeing is that a significant chunk of scientific knowledge is effectively invisible, which raises some pretty fundamental questions about how we share, validate, and build upon research.
So it's not just about individual researchers getting more citations. It's about the very foundation of how science progresses.
Precisely. And Prophy is really committed to tackling this challenge head on. They're sharing their findings widely, trying to start a conversation about the future of scientific communication.
That's great. It sounds like they're not just highlighting the problem, they're actively trying to find solutions.
Absolutely. They see this initial analysis, which they cross-verified with OpenAlex, as just the starting point for a much larger discussion about how we can make scientific knowledge more visible and accessible.
And it seems like they're putting their money where their mouth is, so to speak. They've even mentioned their ongoing work in other areas, like developing AI-powered peer review processes.
Oh, right. I've heard about that. It's pretty
Yeah.
fascinating.
Yeah, it is. It's not the focus of our deep dive today, but it just shows that Prophy is really thinking about how to improve the overall quality and efficiency of scientific publishing.
It's encouraging to see them taking such a proactive approach.
It really is. So, to kind of wrap things up for you, the main takeaway from our deep dive today is this. A surprisingly large portion, about half, of all scientific research is currently going uncited. That means it's essentially invisible to the wider scientific community, which has some pretty significant implications for how science advances and for the efficiency of the whole research enterprise.
Exactly. And it raises some really important questions for everyone, not just scientists. Like, what are the biggest barriers preventing this research from getting the attention it deserves? And maybe even more importantly, what can we do to unlock this vast reservoir of potentially valuable knowledge?
Those are big questions. And they're questions that we all need to be thinking about because at the end of the day, scientific knowledge is a public good, and we should be doing everything we can to make sure it's shared, understood, and built upon.
Couldn't agree more.
So if you're interested in learning more about this topic, and I hope you are, I encourage you to check out Prophy's work. They're doing some really fascinating stuff in this area.
Yeah, definitely worth a look.
Okay, well, that's all the time we have for today. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. It's been a pleasure exploring this with you.
The pleasure was all mine. Thanks for having me.
And until next time, keep those brains curious and those minds open.